On number 7 through 9, you're telling whether it's the quadrilateral is a parallelogram or not. So you need to have a yes or no answer, and only if you say yes do you need to tell why it's a parallelogram. Remember, you only have 6 reasons to pick from of why it's a parallelogram. You have the 5 properties of parallelograms, that the opposite sides are parallel. Remember, you can also use by definition if that's true. That's what the definition of a parallelogram is, a quadrilateral with opposite sides that are parallel. You also know opposite sides are congruent, the opposite angles are congruent, the consecutive angles are supplementary, and that the diagonals bisect each other. You can have a 6th way of showing it's a parallelogram if you know that one pair of opposite sides is both parallel and congruent. You must use the word one pair, and you have to understand that it's the same pair that's parallel and congruent, not just one pair that's parallel and the other one's being congruent. It has to be the same pair. So on number 7, you're given 3 angle measures for this quadrilateral. But because we're given all 3 out of the 4, we can use the fact that we know all 4 of them have to add up to be 360 to find that 4th angle. So you can add up the 85, the 95, and the 85 together. And when you add the 85, 95, and 85, you get 265. When you subtract that from the 360, you find that that 4th angle must also be 95 degrees. So remember, you can only do that if you are given 3 out of the 4. If you only know 2, then these can be anything that add up to be whatever these are from 360. Okay, so you want to make sure that you're given 3 before you find that 4th one. Now you have several different reasons that you can, or a couple of different reasons you can say that this is a parallelogram. So your answer is going to be yes, and you have options. You can either say that the opposite angles are congruent because both pair of opposite angles are congruent. Remember, you can't use that reason if you only have one pair that are congruent. Or you could use number 4, which is consecutive angles are supplementary. Again, remember, all 4 pair of consecutive angles must be supplementary to use this reason. So since these are supplementary, these are supplementary, these are supplementary, and these are supplementary, you can use that reason. Remember, all supplementary means is 2 angles that add to get 180 degrees. So that could be your reason as well. So either one of those, you don't have to give me both of those, just either or. So opposite angles are congruent or consecutive angles are supplementary. Number 8, you're given a couple of angle pairs that are congruent to each other. I always have students that are tempted to use the opposite angles are congruent reason to say that this is a parallelogram, but we don't know any information about these angles right here. So we're not going to use that reason unless we have both pairs of opposite angles that are congruent. You should be able by now to recognize that these 2 angles are on the opposite side of this diagonal, and they're on the inside of these 2 lines right here. So these 2 segments right here make up this angle that we're given information on, and this side make up the angle it's congruent to. There's that zigzag or Z shape that you should be recognizing by now to show that if alternate interior angles are congruent, then we know that these sides must be parallel. So those angle pairs tell me that these sides are parallel to each other. We also have another angle pair that's congruent. And again, these are on opposite sides of the diagonal and inside these 2 lines. So this angle is formed by this segment right here and this segment right here, and this one's formed by this segment and this one. So there's another one of those Z shapes that we've been looking for. So since these alternate interior angles are congruent, then we know these sides are also parallel. So yes, this is a parallelogram, and you have 2 ways of giving the why on this one as well. You can either state out in words that the opposite sides are parallel. Remember, both pairs have to be parallel to use that reason, not just one. Or since that's the definition of a parallelogram, you could just say by definition. So either one of those would be fine for your reason why. On the last one, number 9, you're given links here that have to do with these segments that are inside. And remember, these segments are called diagonals. So since these both have a measure of 5, we can use tick marks to show that those are congruent to each other. Since these are both 11, we can use tick marks to show that those are congruent to each other. But I'm going to use 2 tick marks because they're not 5. If they were both 5, we could use 1 tick mark on them as well. But since they're different, use a different number of tick marks. So if these are congruent, we know this point is the midpoint of that segment, which is a diagonal. If these are congruent, then that's also a midpoint of this diagonal. And we know if the 2 diagonals have the same midpoint, that means the diagonals are bisecting each other. So since that's one of our tests for a parallelogram, this is also a parallelogram, and the reason would be number 5, the diagonals bisect each other. Make sure the reason that you're given is not just one that you would like to be using, but actually goes with the information that's on the parallelogram. So for instance, you can't say the opposite sides are congruent when you have no information about the sides. Okay, so be careful about which reason you're putting down.